The morning the gate closed, the entire neighborhood realized something had changed forever. What looked like a simple fence across a dirt road would soon unravel years of quiet entitlement and reveal a truth no one expected. This story begins on the edge of a peaceful rural subdivision just outside the city limits, where manicured lawns ended and open countryside stretched toward the horizon. For years, residents of the Willow Creek HOA had treated the narrow gravel path beyond the final cul-de-sac as their unofficial shortcut to the highway. It saved 10 minutes on the morning commute, avoided school traffic, and became so routine that no one questioned who actually owned the land beneath their tires. Then Daniel Harper arrived. He wasn't loud or confrontational. He didn't attend HOA meetings, didn't introduce himself door to door, and didn't post in the community forum. He simply purchased 50 acres of rolling pasture beyond the subdivision boundary, land the residents had long assumed belonged to no one. Survey stakes appeared first, then wooden posts. Then, one crisp Friday morning, a steel ranch gate stood locked across the gravel path. By noon, confusion had turned into outrage, and by sunset, one neighbor in particular was already planning to make Daniel regret ever closing that road. No one yet understood that the locked gate wasn't the beginning of a dispute. It was the beginning of a reckoning. By Monday morning, drivers lined up at the new gate, staring through the bars as if the land beyond still belonged to them. Commuters reversed awkwardly, parents checked their watches, and frustration spread faster than the morning fog lifting off the fields. Inside the HOA Facebook group, speculation erupted. Some claimed the road had always been a community access route. Others insisted the county maintained it. A few longtime residents admitted they never actually knew who owned it, they had simply used it for decades. But Karen Whitmore was not interested in uncertainty. Karen lived 3 houses from the cul-de-sac and had built her daily routine around the shortcut. She prided herself on efficiency, punctuality, and maintaining what she called community standards. To her, the closed gate wasn't an inconvenience, it was a personal offense. She drove to the gate before sunrise the next day, stepping out in pressed slacks and sunglasses despite the dim light. A freshly laminated sign hung from the steel frame, private property, and no trespassing. Below it, a smaller notice read, access closed effective immediately. Karen photographed it from multiple angles. Within minutes, the HOA board email thread was active. Within hours, she had drafted a formal complaint, and before sunset, she had found Daniel Harper's mailing address, but Daniel did not respond. Instead, the next morning, a second lock appeared on the gate, and Karen took that as a declaration of war. Karen arrived at Daniel's property the following afternoon, rehearsing her arguments as she drove past acres of open pasture glowing under the autumn sun. She expected a confrontation, maybe even an apology. What she encountered instead was silence. The farmhouse sat back from the road, modest and freshly restored, framed by split-rail fencing and tall grasses bending in the wind. Daniel stood near a tractor, calm and unhurried, as if time moved differently on his land. Karen approached with tight composure. She explained the inconvenience. She emphasized community reliance. She mentioned property values and safety concerns. She spoke as if representing the entire neighborhood. Daniel listened without interruption. When she finished, he simply said the road crossed his land, and his insurance provider required restricted access. He explained he planned to raise livestock and needed to ensure safety and liability protection. His tone remained polite, steady, immovable. Karen insisted the community had used the path for years. Daniel replied that past use did not change ownership. Karen warned the HOA would escalate the matter. Daniel nodded once and returned to his work. The conversation ended without resolution, but what Karen did not see was the small survey marker near the roadside, stamped with the county seal. And what she did not know was that documentation had already been filed weeks earlier. By the time she drove away, convinced she would force the gate open, the path forward was already closing. The HOA board convened an emergency meeting that Thursday evening, drawing an unusually large crowd to the clubhouse. Folding chairs filled every aisle, voices overlapped, and tension hovered in the air like an approaching storm. Karen presented printed photos, highlighted routes, and a timeline showing decades of use. She argued that the gravel path functioned as a necessary access road and that closing it created safety risks for emergency response times. Some neighbors nodded, others quietly admitted they had always assumed the land belonged to a farmer who no longer lived there. One board member suggested negotiating an easement, another questioned whether the HOA had any legal standing at all. The room fell silent when the association's attorney joined via speakerphone. He explained that usage alone does not guarantee access rights. He recommended verifying property surveys, reviewing county records, and avoiding any attempt to remove the gate without legal authority. Karen's expression hardened. She insisted the board must act quickly before one individual dictates access to an entire community. Outside, headlights lined the cul-de-sac where drivers still turned around each morning. Inside, uncertainty replaced confidence. Before the meeting adjourned, the board agreed to request county documentation. Karen left early, already planning her next step, but while the HOA debated options, Daniel installed motion cameras overlooking the gate, and the following morning, tire tracks appeared where someone had tried to drive around it. Sunrise revealed deep ruts carved into the soft earth beside the gate, a makeshift detour forced through tall grass and boundary stakes. The attempt had failed, the ground dipped into a shallow drainage channel, but the message was unmistakable. Daniel reviewed the camera footage in silence. A familiar SUV approached before dawn, paused, then veered off the gravel path in a determined arc. The driver abandoned the effort minutes later and reversed out of view. By mid-morning, wooden posts reinforced the perimeter. By afternoon, a second sign appeared, property boundary monitored by video. Within the HOA, opinions began to shift. Some residents worried the dispute was escalating unnecessarily. Others questioned whether years of convenience had blurred respect for ownership. Karen remained unwavering. She drafted a petition demanding restoration of access and gathered signatures from frustrated commuters. She argued the community's needs outweighed one landowner's preference, yet when the county's preliminary survey documents arrived at the HOA office, they confirmed what Daniel had stated from the beginning. The gravel path lay entirely within his deeded property. The board scheduled a formal review, Karen scheduled a neighborhood rally, and Daniel scheduled the installation of a permanent cattle guard at the entrance. What no one anticipated was that the next gathering at the gate would draw more than neighbors. It would draw county officials. The morning of the rally dawned clear and bright, the kind of crisp rural day that made the countryside feel endless and calm. Residents gathered near the locked gate, some curious, others frustrated, many unsure why tensions had grown so quickly. Karen stood at the front, holding her petition. She spoke about fairness, community access, and shared responsibility. Applause rose from pockets of the crowd, though not as strong as she expected. Then two county vehicles pulled onto the shoulder. A surveyor stepped out first, followed by a county land management officer carrying a clipboard and rolled maps. The murmurs faded into attentive silence as the documents were unrolled across the hood of the vehicle. Boundary lines were traced, parcel numbers were confirmed, historical plats were referenced. The officer explained that the road had never been designated public access and that no easement existed. Any future access would require the landowner's consent and formal legal agreements. Karen's petition lowered slowly in her hands. Some neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, others looked toward Daniel, who stood quietly near the fence line. The officer concluded that the gate was lawful and the land privately owned, but before dispersing, he added one unexpected detail. A future county bypass project might eliminate the shortcut's usefulness entirely. The crowd began to disperse in thoughtful silence. And for the first time, the gate no longer looked like a barrier, it looked like a boundary long overdue. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of the neighborhood slowly reset. Drivers adjusted routes, morning routines shifted, and conversations moved on to school events and seasonal decorations. The locked gate faded from daily outrage into quiet acceptance. Daniel continued restoring his land, installing fencing, and preparing pasture for livestock. Occasionally, neighbors passing along the main road would wave. He returned the gesture, never mentioning the conflict. Karen stopped posting in the HOA forum. Instead, she attended the next board meeting and recommended clearer communication about property boundaries and future development planning. Her voice lacked its earlier sharpness. Replaced by a measured calm that surprised even her closest allies, the cattle guard was installed, replacing the temporary barrier with a permanent, practical solution. Wild grasses grew back along the failed detour, erasing the ruts that once symbolized resistance. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rolling fields, the gate cast a long shadow across the gravel path. It no longer represented defiance or division. It marked clarity, a visible reminder that assumptions can shape behavior, but facts define reality. What began as a shortcut had become a lesson, what felt like loss had revealed boundaries, and what seemed like conflict had quietly restored respect between neighbors and the land they shared. And that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.